Thank you all for being here. And of course, my deepest thanks to a friend of deep friendship and long-standing, Richard Salem. I can't remember how many years ago it's been, but it's been quite a few. And I remember when he started Enable America. And you know, I have more to say about that in a second, but I like to think that perhaps the toughest 10 years of Enable America is behind us. Now we're going to have a new sort of an expansion of Enable America because of more employment of people with disabilities. I also want to recognize Chet Culver, my great friend. I knew him when he was little. I've used that line before. He was at one time. But of course, his father, who is a great friend of mine, former Senator Culver. But I can remember the event when Governor Culver was then Secretary of State Culver, and under that Help America Vote Act, he took the lead in expanding and making sure that every voting place in Iowa was fully accessible to every person with any kind of disability, and thus Iowa became the first state in the nation that had every voting place accessible to people with disabilities. That's what Chet Culver did. So we are all grateful for Enable America's dedication to help increase the employment of people with disabilities. You know, I might just go off my cards here for a little bit. You know, when we passed the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990, we knew what we wanted to do. We worked on this for several years, and we finally got it through. Strong bipartisan support. In the early years of ADA, we were most interested in getting certain things implemented, like the built environment, making sure that transportation was fully accessible, making sure that communications and telecommunications, especially for the deaf, hard of hearing, were also fully available. And so those things were sort of being implemented through the 90s. And I think a lot of us thought that, well, sometime in the late 90s, will we get all this stuff sort of set in? Because there was always the fear that someone was going to come along and start nibbling away at the ADA. I thought, well, at that time, then we'll really make this frontal assault on employment. Well, then in 1999, we got hit with 3 cases, the Sutton Trilogy cases. And then in 2002, the Toyota case, which threw a lot of confusion in the workplace as to who was disabled and who was not, who fell under the umbrella of ADA, who didn't. We then began a process, well, really right around about 2001, even before the Toyota case, of trying to get legislation passed to let the Supreme Court know what we really meant. I remember one time Bob Dole and I, we were over at the Supreme Court for one of those Sutton cases. And we walked out afterward, and one of the reporters asked us about the decision of the court. And Bob Dole, in his usual way, said, you know, they said we didn't have enough evidence on discrimination. He said we had, I forget the number, but it was 300 and some cases. He said, what do they want? They want 350, 400, 450, 500? If they just give us the number, we'll get it for them. Well, we finally went to work, and we finally then passed the ADA Amendments Act of 2008, and signed by the second President Bush. Well, that cleared up the confusion that had been instigated by the Supreme Court 9 years earlier. So I give you this little tutorial to say that, you know, we've been very frustrated. Those of us who have worked on the ADA and worked all these years, frustrated by the fact that still 2/3 of people with disabilities are unemployed in America. You know, we see all these unemployment statistics, you know, whether it's 8% or 10%, or African American youth are close to 20% unemployed. Think about people with disabilities. 2 out of 3. That's 66% unemployment. And these are people that can work, want to work, can contribute to our economic well-being in America. So after we got the ADA Act amendments passed in 2008 and 2009, some of us then began to focus on, okay, now we've got to make a frontal assault on this. Of course, Enable America had been working in the trenches long before that on getting people employed, even though we had those Supreme Court cases that made it very tough. Richard was out there all the time, state after state, going around the country, making sure that we could open whatever doors we could. So in 2009, we took this on and said, we got to make some differences. And I met with a group of CEOs and business community, and I also met with the disability community as to how we would approach this. And so that started in 2010, this effort. In 2011, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce issued a report, and they committed themselves, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce committed themselves to employing 1 million more people with disabilities by 2015 in the private sector, in competitive employment. That's the key word, in competitive employment. And we've found in the past that so many people with disabilities, even if they got a job, it was a dead-end job. It didn't challenge them. It didn't provide them any kind of training development to further their skills, to become more responsible, to take on more responsibilities and increase their aptitude in jobs. It was sort of dead end. And so the Chamber of Commerce came out with that. The disability community got together, and this spring we had a meeting up in Connecticut, sponsored by Walgreens. And we had CEOs of some of the largest corporations in America there. People like UPS, FedEx, and Procter & Gamble, and Lowe's, and Office Max, and Walmart. I mean, this is heavy stuff, folks. We met up there at the invitation of Walgreens, and they showed us their distribution center, one of the largest, their largest in the country. 50% of all the people employed there are people with disabilities. 50% in competitive employment. And guess what they showed? Their bottom line in that center was better than any bottom line in any one of their other distribution centers. Imagine that. 50%. What they found was that with a little training, with a little bit of support, a few modifications here and there, people with disabilities worked harder, were more productive, didn't take sick leave, showed up for work all the time, and thus that center is their most productive one. I think what it showed was that employment of people with disabilities is not something that is a charitable act. That's not what we're about. What we're about is making sure that every individual has the opportunity to work in a job that he or she enjoys, one that challenges them, and to give them the ability to proceed and to grow and develop more. So I think we're really right now, and we're going to have a follow-up. Congressman Sessions in the House side was up with us in Connecticut. He's going to sponsor the second one down in Dallas sometime around January or February. And so we're finding now the business community is now beginning to really catch on to this. And with the stamp of approval from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that we're going to increase by 20% employment of people with disabilities by 2015, we now are really going to start moving. And that is where Enable America, under the great leadership of my dear friend Richard Salem, is right there, ready to go. This is the organization that can now, because of their past, can now move with the private sector to start getting these people trained and employed in full-time competitive employment. in the next 3, 4, 5, next 3 years by 2015. Actually, next 2 years now that I think about it. 2 years and a couple of months. So I'm very enthusiastic because of what I've seen in Lowe's or in Walmart or what Walgreens has shown and other companies, Office Max and others have shown. Procter & Gamble, they're leading the way. And we've shown that if just a little bit of supportive service, like say a little bit of changes, maybe people with disabilities are your best employees. That came as no shock to me. I got involved in this because of my brother who was disabled. He was deaf. And he was told when he was a young man he could be a baker or a shoe cobbler or a printer's assistant, and that was it. And he said he didn't want to be any of those things, so they made him a baker. Actually, he was a pretty good baker, truth be told. That's not what he wanted to do. Later on, he got a job working on a very high-tech machine, manufacturing machine, making little jet nozzles for jet engines, very intricate. Challenged him. He got that job. I came home from the military one Christmas. My brother never got married. I went to the Christmas party with him. He'd been there 10 years on this new job. And in 10 years, and they gave him a gold watch at this wonderful Christmas dinner because in 10 years he hadn't missed one day and hadn't been late one day for work in 10 years. In 23 years working there, my brother missed 3 days, and that's because of Iowa snow, because of a blizzard. So I learned a long time ago that if people with disabilities given the right opportunities and challenges, not dead-end jobs, but a challenging job, they're up to it. They can do amazing things when they're given that opportunity. And so I just so this is my way of saying thank you for this wonderful award, but so many other people have preceded me and so many other people do so much good work in this area.